What would you do if the woman society looks down on is actually the one who once made giant corporations tremble? If the quiet mother living in a peaceful neighborhood is secretly hiding a past powerful enough to shake the entire financial world? And if her own young son is the first to realize that his mother isn't weak at all, she's just hiding, will that buried truth save them or destroy everything? The entire lavish ballroom fell silent when the boy standing beside the quiet woman tightened his grip on his mother's hand and whispered a sentence just loud enough for the most powerful man in the room to hear. No one knew that this single moment was about to tear open a secret buried for years. Evelyn Carter stood at the edge of the light, her dress so simple it seemed out of place among silk, diamonds, and polished confidence. People looked at her the way they looked at someone who had wandered in by mistake. A single mom, an ordinary woman, someone who did not belong in this world. She felt their eyes slide over her, pause, then move on, as if she were not worth remembering. Evelyn was used to that. She had chosen invisibility like armor, but tonight that armor felt dangerously thin. Beside her, Leo stood stiffly, his polished shoes awkward against the cold marble floor. The 9-year-old did not fully understand the meaning behind the practiced handshakes or the smiles that never reached anyone's eyes. But he felt the tension tightening in his mother's chest. He looked up at Evelyn and saw the way her jaw was set, the way her gaze stayed steady without being calm. Leo knew this version of his mother well, the quiet one, the one who watched before she spoke, the one who always stepped half a pace back. Daniel Rothman drew attention without effort, the CEO of Rothman Industrial Group, the man every glance instinctively gravitated toward. He stood beside Evelyn, tall and composed, one hand resting lightly at her lower back in a subtle protective gesture. To everyone else, Evelyn was simply the woman he had brought out of courtesy, a shadow, a safe choice. Daniel knew he was being watched. He also knew his ex-wife was somewhere in the room, waiting for the right moment to strike. Natalie Rothman never rushed. She waited. When she finally approached, the air around them shifted. Her smile was sharp, carefully honed, her voice soft enough to sound polite while cutting just as deep. She studied Evelyn slowly, from head to toe, without hiding her judgment. Then she smiled, the smile of someone who was certain she stood above everyone else. Daniel felt the tension rise and glanced at Evelyn, preparing to intervene. But Evelyn did not move. She remained still, calm, like water before a storm. Leo looked at Natalie, then back at his mother. He did not like the way that woman looked at her. He did not like the way her voice made the room feel colder. A vague unease spread through his chest. Leo tightened his grip on Evelyn's hand. She felt it immediately. She lowered her gaze just enough for him to see her eyes. There was no fear in them, only a quiet certainty that made Leo's heart pound harder. Natalie delivered her remark as if it were harmless. A comment about background, about place, about how some people were born for the stage and others belonged in the audience. A few soft laughs followed. Daniel felt heat rush to his ears. He was about to cut in. Evelyn spoke first. Her voice was not loud, not sharp, but it stopped everything. She did not defend herself. She did not apologize. She said one sentence, short, precise. It landed like a blade, cutting straight into the thing Natalie prized most. Silence crashed down, so heavy that everyone could hear their own breathing. Leo looked up at his mother. In that instant, he saw something else. A version of her he remembered only in fragments. The old house, the late-night phone calls, the adults who leaned forward to listen. His heart raced, half fear, half pride. Natalie stepped back, half a pace. Just half. But it was enough for Daniel to notice. He turned to Evelyn, and for the first time his curiosity sharpened into something else. This woman was not weak. She had never been someone to step on. Evelyn felt his gaze. She knew she had crossed the line of safety. She also knew she did not regret it. Her hand rested on Leo's shoulder, gentle but steady. In her mind, an old voice whispered that silence could be power. But there were moments when truth had to surface, even if only in a single sentence. Leo leaned closer to her. He did not fully understand what had just happened, but he understood one thing clearly. His mother was not who they thought she was, and maybe, just maybe, tonight, the world was about to understand that too. Morning in Ridgewood Heights always began with small, ordinary sounds. The kettle whistling, a spoon tapping the rim of a mug, the low rumble of the school bus somewhere down the street. But to Evelyn Carter, each sound felt like a reminder that she was living a different life now, one she had built with her own hands to escape the lights and the names that once made entire markets tremble. She stood in the narrow kitchen as early sunlight spilled across the scratched wooden counter. One hand spread butter on toast while the other adjusted Leo's collar. At 9 years old, he was growing so fast that yesterday's uniform already pulled tight at the shoulders. Leo chewed quietly, watching his mother with bright eyes that were no longer entirely innocent. At that age, most children drifted through mornings without a thought. Leo had learned to read his mother's silences like a map. "You didn't sleep again, did you?" The question landed softly, but it made Evelyn pause for a fraction of a second. She smiled, just enough warmth to hide the exhaustion underneath. "I had a little work. I'm fine." Leo looked straight at her as if he didn't believe answers that came too easily. "You say you're fine whenever you're not." Something inside Evelyn tightened. She bent down and rested both hands on his shoulders. "Don't worry. I just think too much sometimes." Leo blinked. "When you think too much, you look really far away, like you're somewhere else." Evelyn didn't answer right away. She turned toward the window. Beyond the low fence stood the gray house next door, neat to the point of coldness. The garage door was closed, the lawn perfectly trimmed, the kind of house people assumed belonged to a man who had never made a mistake in his life. But Evelyn knew better. She had seen the light in his office burning late into the night. She had heard once, purely by accident, a sigh heavy as stone drift through the darkness between their homes. Daniel Rothman. In this neighborhood, he was just the polite neighbor who said good morning and lifted heavy boxes when deliveries were left at her door. But Evelyn had never believed in coincidence. She noticed the way he stood, the way he held silence, the care with which he chose his words. Some people were born to lead. Some carried authority like a shadow, no matter how carefully they tried to hide it. Daniel was one of them. Leo set his bowl down and slipped his backpack over his shoulder. "I'm heading out. Remember to eat something. Don't just drink coffee." Evelyn laughed, but there was a crack in it. This boy was growing faster than she was ready for. Leo was no longer just a child being protected. In his own way, he was starting to protect her, with questions she couldn't always dodge. She walked him to the door. Cold air bit at her face, stinging her eyes. The bus stopped at the end of the street. Leo jogged a few steps, then turned back. "Mom? Yes? If someone says bad things about you again like that party last night, will you say something like that again?" Evelyn felt her heart tighten. He remembered every second of that ballroom, the looks, the laughter, the moment she stepped out of silence and delivered a sentence that froze an entire room. "I don't want to have to speak like that," Evelyn said slowly. "But if someone tries to make us smaller, I won't let them win." Leo nodded, his expression far too serious for his age. "I liked it. You looked like the real you." The words struck straight into her chest. Evelyn wanted to ask what he meant by the real you, but Leo was already climbing onto the bus. The doors closed. The bus pulled away, carrying noise and color and childhood down the street. Evelyn stood alone on the porch. In the quiet, the weight of the Gala night rushed back like cold water. She remembered Natalie Rothman, the sharp smile, the honeyed words laced with poison. She remembered the way Daniel had looked at her, no longer just appreciative, but questioning. She went back inside and closed the door, leaning her back against it. A long breath escaped, as if she had been holding it for hours. On the dining table sat her old laptop, open to a spreadsheet. She didn't need to look at it for the numbers to start moving in her mind. Old habits never died. They just slept. Evelyn had tried to drown them in small things, logo projects, client emails, utility bills, as if a simpler life could wash away memories of boardrooms where a single decision from her once sent stock prices crashing or soaring. Her phone vibrated. A message from an unfamiliar number. Short, clean, like a blade sliding across skin. "I know who you are. We need to talk." The blood in Evelyn's veins turned cold. Her fingers tightened until they went pale. She looked around the small house as if the walls could shield her from the past. Leo's face flashed in her mind, his steady eyes, the weight of his quiet words. You looked like the real you. If her secret came out, what would she lose? Not just her peace, not just her disguise, but the one thing Leo needed most: safety. A childhood not torn apart by names, cameras, and whispers. The doorbell rang. 3 chimes. Even. Calm. Like the person outside knew she was home. Evelyn walked toward the living room, each step measured, her heart pounding hard enough to shake her ribs. Through the peephole, she saw Daniel standing there, dark coat buttoned, his face unreadable. But his eyes held something different. Not the neighborly politeness she knew. The focus of a man who had just realized he was standing at the edge of a much larger story. Evelyn rested her hand on the doorknob. One thought cut through her mind, sharp and undeniable. Last night had only been the beginning. Daniel Rothman was not used to hesitation. For most of his adult life, he had been the man who made decisions while others were still weighing options. He cut away weak paths, chose the least risky route, and moved forward without looking back. But that morning, standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, the familiar certainty did not come. The Gala would not let him go. Evelyn's words replayed in his mind. Not loud, not aggressive, but sharp enough to strike a place Natalie had always believed untouchable. Daniel had seen the shift in the room. He had seen the rare half-step back from his ex-wife. And he had seen the most unsettling thing of all: Evelyn's calm. Not the calm of someone reckless, but the calm of someone who knew exactly where she stood. He turned the old ring on his finger. A habit left over from the early days of building the company, when everything had been fragile. His phone vibrated. A message from Natalie. One line. Cold. You think you understand her? Daniel turned off the screen. He had no interest in understanding Natalie anymore. What unsettled him was the woman who lived next door. The woman who had walked into that ballroom as if she had nothing to lose, then spoken a single sentence that collapsed the space into silence. He left the office earlier than usual. No announcement, no appointment. When his car turned into Ridgewood Heights, he realized his hands were gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Some questions could no longer be ignored. Evelyn Carter. Her name surfaced alongside the image of Leo. The boy standing straight beside his mother, eyes sharp with both caution and trust. Daniel had not missed the moment the child tightened his grip on Evelyn's hand when Natalie approached. That was not the instinct of a child raised among glittering events. It was the instinct of a child used to protecting. He parked in front of his house. Everything was quiet. Then he looked across the low fence. Evelyn's door was closed, the curtains half drawn, light inside, dim and steady. Daniel hesitated for a breath. One of the rare moments he allowed himself to pause. Then he crossed the narrow path and rang the bell. 3 chimes, even, unhurried. Inside, Evelyn stood still for a few seconds. She had known this moment would come. She just had not expected it so soon. Her hand was still cold from the message she had received that morning. She looked around the small house, as if memorizing it. The smell of coffee, the chair Leo always sat in, the fragile quiet. When she opened the door, Daniel stood there without the polite smile he usually wore. His gaze was direct, focused, but not aggressive. "Good afternoon, Evelyn." His voice was low, measured, careful not to intrude. Evelyn nodded. "Hello, Daniel." Silence settled between them. Not heavy, but tight. Daniel broke it first. "I didn't mean to intrude, but I think we should talk about last night." Evelyn felt her heartbeat shift, but her expression remained steady. "If you'd like to come in." Daniel stepped inside. The house was smaller than he had imagined. No signs of excess. No display of comfort meant to impress. Everything was neat, functional, arranged by someone who understood restraint as survival. He noticed Leo's drawing taped to the refrigerator. A house. 3 people. A son far too large. Daniel turned away before an emotion he didn't want could take shape. "I want to apologize," he said, his voice slower now, "for putting you in that position. Natalie isn't easy to deal with." Evelyn met his eyes without hesitation. "I know." Daniel was slightly taken aback. Not by the answer, but by the certainty behind it. "You handled it very differently," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Not like someone unfamiliar with that kind of environment." Evelyn smiled faintly. Not defensive, not an admission, just the smallest curve at the corner of her mouth. "Everyone has a past, Daniel. Not everyone chooses to carry it with them all the time." Daniel felt a door open, then close, right in front of him. He looked at her longer than politeness allowed. In that moment, He realized what unsettled him was not her response, but the sense that she was controlling the rhythm of the conversation. "I have an invitation," he said, deciding to be direct. "Next week, my company is hosting a charity fundraiser, smaller than the gala, but there will be press, partners. Natalie will be there." Evelyn did not respond immediately. She glanced down at her hands, then back at him. "I don't think that's a good idea." Daniel nodded, as if he had expected that. "I know, but I need you there. Not as a shadow. As someone standing beside me. I need your presence." The air in the room tightened. Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat clearly now. She thought of Leo, of the message from that morning, of the name hovering just beyond the edge of the life she had fought to rebuild. "If I agree," she said slowly, "I can't promise I'll stay silent." Daniel met her gaze. "I don't need you to be silent." A pause, an unspoken understanding. Evelyn understood. And that realization frightened her more than any threat could have. She drew a steady breath, then nodded. "I'll think about it." Daniel didn't push. He simply nodded in return. But as he turned to leave, one thing was clear to both of them. What had happened at the gala was not an accident, and this invitation was not just about a party. The fundraiser took place on a Thursday evening inside a historic hotel in the heart of the city, where thick stone walls had quietly witnessed decades of power-changing hands. Warm golden light washed over the grand hall, reflecting off crystal and polished metal, creating a sense of luxury carefully controlled, just enough to make people believe everything here was under command. Evelyn entered with Daniel, unhurried, perfectly paced. Her dress was understated, but every line was intentional. No one looked at her for long, and that was exactly what made her dangerous. Daniel felt the shift the moment they appeared. More eyes turned toward him than usual. Subtle nods, smiles shaped by calculation. He was accustomed to all of it, but tonight the attention carried another layer. They were not only watching him, they were assessing the woman at his side. Evelyn knew it. She read body language like instinct, a quick glance, a slight tilt of the head. She felt herself being placed into a familiar category, a temporary companion, someone not worth remembering, a minor detail in a larger picture. Daniel's hand rested lightly at her back, a wordless reminder. "If anything feels off, tell me," he murmured. Evelyn gave a small nod, but inside she understood clearly. What was coming was no surprise. Natalie Rothman would not miss this opportunity, and she did not. Natalie appeared just after dinner, when the atmosphere had loosened, when wine had softened caution. She approached with flawless grace, each step carefully measured. Silk clung to her frame. Her smile shone. Her eyes were cold. Daniel stiffened the moment he saw her. Evelyn did not. Natalie stopped in front of them, her gaze brushing past Daniel as if he were something familiar and worn, then lingering on Evelyn longer than necessary. Much longer. "Daniel," she said sweetly, "it's been a while." "I hear you've been busy." Daniel returned a polite smile. "Natalie." Then her eyes shifted back to Evelyn. "Oh, you must be the interesting woman everyone's been talking about." Evelyn smiled with practiced courtesy. "It's nice to meet you." Natalie tilted her head as if evaluating an object. "Are you a friend of Daniel's?" "I'm standing beside him," Evelyn replied calmly, short enough to close doors, clear enough not to be dismissed. Natalie let out a soft laugh. "Really, Daniel usually has very specific tastes." She paused deliberately. "I'm curious how the two of you met." Daniel was about to speak. Evelyn stepped forward first. Barely a step, but enough for Natalie to notice. "We're neighbors." The air shifted. A few nearby guests began to pay attention. Natalie's eyes narrowed. Neighbors. How charming. I've always believed the most surprising things come from the simplest places. Simple, Natalie emphasized, as if it were a final verdict. Evelyn felt Leo's presence in her mind. The serious eyes, the tight grip of his hand. She took a slow breath, not to prepare an attack, but to keep her rhythm. Daniel felt the tension rise. He recognized Natalie's method well. Never strike directly, just distort the space until others felt small on their own. Natalie continued, her voice gentle, almost helpful. Events like this can be a bit overwhelming for those who aren't used to them, but I'm sure Daniel knows what he's doing. The words landed like a needle, thin, sharp, aimed straight at Evelyn. A brief silence formed, very brief, but long enough for people to hold their breath. Evelyn looked directly at Natalie. She did not smile. She did not frown. She simply looked, and in that gaze there was no defense, only the cold clarity of someone who had once stood far higher. Some rooms look very large, Evelyn said slowly, but they're actually too small for people who are used to thinking big. The sentence wasn't loud, but it cut, clean, exact. Natalie faltered, just for an instant, but Daniel saw it clearly, the moment she failed to mask it. A few people glanced at one another. Someone cleared their throat. No one laughed. Evelyn continued, her voice steady. I didn't come here to prove I belong anywhere. I came because I chose to stand beside someone I respect. Daniel felt his heart beat harder. Not from fear, from something else, a confirmation he could not undo. Natalie pressed her lips together. Her smile no longer held. She stepped back half a pace, just half, but it was enough. I should go greet a few friends, Natalie said, her tone tighter now. Enjoy your evening. She turned away, heels clicking softly against the stone floor, but the aura of untouchable certainty had cracked. Daniel looked at Evelyn, this time without hiding his attention. Not curiosity, not appreciation, a question, large, heavy, impossible to take back. Evelyn felt it. She knew she had stepped farther out of safety. She also knew Leo would not be disappointed. Music swelled again in the distance. Conversations resumed. But something had shifted. Tonight, Evelyn Carter was no longer a background detail, and Natalie Rothman had just realized she had underestimated the quiet woman standing beside Daniel. Daniel didn't say anything on the drive home. The city slid past the windows like a blurred ribbon of light, casting alternating shadows across his face. Evelyn sat beside him, her back straight, her hands resting still on her lap, but her heartbeat no longer steady. She knew she had broken something. Not with Natalie. With Daniel. The silence between them wasn't heavy, but it was sharp. It didn't smell like anger. It carried the scent of unasked questions, of pieces shifting out of their safe, familiar places. When the car stopped in front of the house, Daniel finally spoke. His voice was low, measured. Evelyn, you didn't have to do that. Evelyn turned to him. The streetlight illuminated his face, revealing eyes searching more for understanding than blame. I know, she said, but I chose to. Daniel nodded slightly. He didn't ask more, but inside him a door had opened, and behind it was no longer the simple woman he thought he knew. The front door closed softly behind Evelyn. The familiar quiet wrapped around her. Then a small voice came from the living room. Mom. Leo sat on the couch, knees pulled up, a book resting loosely on his lap. He wasn't reading. His eyes were fixed on her, sharper than his age suggested. Why are you home so late? Evelyn stopped. In that moment, every layer of social control fell away. There was only a mother facing a son who had noticed too much. It was a fundraiser, she said. I'm sorry. I should have told you. Leo tilted his head. Like the other nights when you said you had meetings but you came home later than usual. The words weren't accusatory, just observant. Evelyn walked over and sat down in front of him, eye level. You didn't go to sleep? I was waiting for you, Leo replied. Then he studied her more closely. Are you sad? The question landed cleanly. Evelyn took a slow breath. No, not sad. Just tired. Leo didn't accept that. He looked at her for a long moment, then spoke quietly. That woman made you uncomfortable, didn't she? Evelyn froze. You met her? No, but you look like you used to. Like when you'd stare out the window and not say anything. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. She brushed her fingers through his hair. Leo, sometimes adults have to deal with people who aren't kind. Leo nodded, very serious. But you're not supposed to be afraid of them. Evelyn let out a soft laugh that faded almost immediately. You think I'm afraid? Leo thought for a moment. I think you're hiding. The words fell gently, but they weighed more than anything Natalie had said. Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief second. When she opened them, she saw real concern in her son's eyes. Hiding from what? She asked. From the mom you used to be, Leo said. The strong one. The one people listened to. The one I saw on stages, talking like you weren't scared of anyone. Evelyn felt a sharp ache in her chest. You remember that? I remember you smiling like that, Leo replied. Now you smile, but it feels like you're holding your breath. The silence stretched. Not because Evelyn didn't know what to say, but because she knew he was right. She pulled him into her arms. Leo hugged her tightly, not like a child clinging, like someone trying to hold an adult together. You're not weak, Mom, Leo whispered. I know. Evelyn rested her forehead against his hair. I'm just learning how to live differently. Leo looked up at her. But you don't have to become smaller to live differently. A simple sentence. and it cut straight through fear and truth. Later that night, after Leo had fallen asleep, Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen. Warm light reflected her image in the glass. The woman in the reflection looked calm, but her eyes were no longer avoiding themselves. Somewhere else in the city, Daniel stood by his window, a glass in his hand. He replayed the moment Natalie had faltered, remembered Evelyn's gaze. No defense, no apology, just quiet strength. He realized he wasn't just curious anymore. He was being pulled toward a truth he wasn't ready to face. And between those two adults stood a child who had seen what both of them were trying not to. This chapter ended not with an explosion, but with a quiet awakening. Evelyn understood that the mask she wore wasn't just hiding her from the world. It was hiding her from her son. And Daniel, though he didn't yet know the full truth, felt one thing with absolute clarity. The woman he thought was peaceful was, in fact, holding back a storm. The next morning came too soon. Evelyn woke while the sky was still gray, the sound of garbage trucks outside moving with steady rhythm, like a countdown. She lay still for a few seconds, one hand resting on her chest, feeling her heartbeat. It wasn't racing like it'd been the night before, but it wasn't calm either. In the next room, Leo was still asleep. His breathing was even, safe. His presence anchored her to the present, but it also reflected everything she could no longer avoid. Evelyn went downstairs and turned on the coffee machine. The familiar smell spread through the kitchen, grounding her. Out of habit, she opened her laptop. She only meant to check a few emails. The first subject line made her hand freeze in midair. Attendance confirmation invitation, a regional business networking event hosted by Daniel's company, scheduled for the weekend. Not a gala, no lights, no gowns. Just a professional gathering, but the guest list made the real risk unmistakable. Names she recognized, names that once waited outside her office for a single nod. She closed the laptop, her heart beat harder. Leo appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair still messy. "You're up early. Old habit," Evelyn said, turning and smiling. Leo looked at her coffee cup, then at her face. "You're thinking too much again. Not a question, a conclusion." Evelyn exhaled. "There's something I need to decide." "Is it big?" Leo asked. "Big," Evelyn answered, "but not dangerous." Leo stepped closer and leaned against the counter. "I don't like it when you're scared." Evelyn bent down until she was eye level with him. "I'm not scared. I'm weighing things." Leo thought for a moment, then spoke slowly. "If you don't do it, you'll regret it. If you do, you'll worry. But either way, you'll still be you." A simple sentence, but it sounded like permission. Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you." That afternoon, Daniel called. He didn't waste time, maybe because he no longer wanted to. "There's a small event this weekend. I want you there." Evelyn was silent for a beat. "I know." Daniel continued. "I'm not asking. I'm being honest. Your presence would be useful." "Useful how?" Evelyn asked. Daniel paused. Then he spoke plainly. "You see things other people don't, and I trust your judgment and acknowledgement, not dramatic, but enough to crack another layer of the protective shell Evelyn was holding." "I'll come," she said, "but on one condition." Daniel didn't sound surprised. "What condition?" "Don't introduce me as your guest. Don't assign me a role. I'll attend as an observer." Daniel understood. He nodded, though she couldn't see it. "All right." When the call ended, Evelyn sat by the window for a long time. The city looked different in daylight. Fewer secrets, less shelter. That evening, as Evelyn was preparing dinner, there was a knock at the door. Daniel stood on the porch without a coat, as if he decided to come here on impulse. "I need to talk." Leo appeared behind his mother. "Hi, Daniel." Daniel smiled, his expression softening. "Hi, Leo." Evelyn sent Leo to his room, then turned back. "What is it?" Daniel lowered his voice. "I've been thinking a lot about that night, about Natalie, about you." Evelyn said nothing. Daniel continued. "I'm used to people who show power with their voices. You don't. You don't need to prove anything. And that makes me cautious." "Cautious?" Evelyn asked. "Because I don't know who I'm standing in front of," Daniel replied. "And I don't like not knowing." It was an unpolished truth. Not cruel, but not easy. Evelyn met his gaze. Some people don't want to be known, not because they have nothing, but because they have too much. Daniel fell silent. This time, he was the one thinking. Leo peeked out from his room. "Mom, can I listen?" Evelyn turned. "No, Leo." Leo nodded, but before leaving, he said, "Daniel, my mom is really good. You should trust that." Daniel watched the boy disappear, then looked back at Evelyn. I think I'm starting to. Not a promise, but a step. When Daniel left, Evelyn leaned against the door. She knew the path ahead would no longer be quiet. The weekend event would be a line. Either she would remain on the outside, living safely inside the shadow she had built, or she would step into the light, where everything she had tried to forget would call her name again. And this time, Leo would see all of it. The weekend event took place inside a modern glass building on the edge of the financial district, a space designed to display transparency, light everywhere, no dark corners, nowhere to hide. Evelyn entered alone, no Daniel at her side, no introductions, no assigned role, just a quiet woman blending into the flow of people, dressed simply enough to be nearly invisible. But the way she observed was not invisible. Her gaze moved slowly, deliberately, as if she were reading a map only she could see. Daniel stood across the room, speaking with two investors. He noticed Evelyn immediately. Not because she stood out, but because her calm presence sharply contrasted with the tension in the air. He didn't approach, he kept his word. Evelyn moved through the reception area, listening to fragments of conversation. She heard familiar terms: optimization, restructuring, efficiency, concepts that had once been her oxygen, now spoken by people who barely skimmed the surface. She didn't interrupt. She simply noted. Then she heard a name. Not loudly, not intentionally, but enough. She stopped near the drink table, her fingers resting lightly on a glass of water. Behind her, two men were talking, their voices low but confident. One mentioned a recent deal, a deal that should not exist if one truly understood its internal structure. Evelyn frowned slightly. She turned and joined the conversation as if out of casual curiosity. Excuse me, I heard you mention supply chain expansion. Have you considered the risks of system integration? The two men looked at her. A quick assessment. Then polite smiles. Our technical team is handling it, one of them replied. Nothing to worry about. Evelyn nodded, of course. But if operational data is fragmented, the technical team only sees the surface. The problems will appear in about 6 months when costs quietly begin to rise. Silence followed, brief but unmistakable. The other man asked, his tone changed. What field are you in? Evelyn smiled faintly. I've worked with systems where there's no margin for error. The answer revealed nothing, but it planted doubt. Daniel watched from across the room. He saw the circle around Evelyn shift. People leaned in, asked questions, listened. She was no longer a background detail. Another person joined, then another. Daniel didn't step in, but he felt it clearly. The room was recalibrating its focus. Then the inevitable happened. A tall man with silver hair and a dark suit stepped into the circle. His eyes lingered on Evelyn longer than courtesy required. He narrowed his gaze. I'm sorry? Have we met before? Evelyn knew this moment would come. She looked at him calmly. It's possible, he tilted his head. The way you analyze, the way you ask questions. I've heard this voice before. The air thickened. Daniel tightened his grip on his glass. He didn't move closer, but his heartbeat accelerated. The man continued, lowering his voice. Were you involved with the Aurora project? An old name, a name that disappeared from headlines along with her. Evelyn neither denied nor confirmed. She simply said that project failed because people refused to listen in time. The answer made him pause. Then, very slowly, he smiled, a knowing smile. Then I wasn't mistaken. Around them, others began to sense the shift. Questions formed, soft, whispered, but spreading. Daniel finally stepped forward, not to rescue her, but to stand in the right place. He positioned himself beside Evelyn, not crowding her, just close enough to make one thing clear. She was not an outsider. Daniel spoke, his voice calm. I believe we should listen to her. No one objected. Evelyn looked at Daniel. Just for a second, in her eyes there was no more hiding, only an unspoken agreement taking shape. She turned back to the group. If you truly want sustainable expansion, you need to dismantle the current structure before building anything new. Otherwise, it will collapse from the inside. No embellishment, no raised voice, just raw truth. The silence stretched. Then one person nodded, then another. Daniel felt the moment land. The moment someone stopped running. At home, Leo sat at his desk, working on his homework. He paused, looked toward the window. He didn't know why. He only felt that his mother was crossing an invisible line. And this time, she didn't turn back. Rumors don't spread through noise. They spread through glances. After the event, Evelyn left early. No goodbyes. No searching for Daniel. She stepped out of the glass building as dusk settled, the city lights reflecting off the facade behind her like an exaggerated mirror. She knew she had left a mark, one that couldn't be erased, one that couldn't be taken back. Daniel stayed. He stood amid a chain of conversations, but he wasn't really listening anymore. The questions began to change shape. They were no longer about deals. They were about her. Who is she? How do you know her? Does she have something to do with Aurora? Daniel didn't answer directly. He only said that Evelyn was someone he trusted. And every time he said it, he felt himself stepping farther outside his own comfort zone. That evening, Daniel didn't go straight home. He stayed at the office, fluorescent lights casting a pale glow over a desk crowded with documents. He opened his laptop, typed a name, then paused. Evelyn Carter. Just 2 words, but enough to pull an entire past into the present. The results loaded slowly, as if the internet itself were hesitating. Old articles, conferences, stage photos, headlines that once carried weight. The woman in the images stood tall, her gaze unflinching, her confidence so complete it required no defense. She didn't look like the quiet woman sitting in a neighbor's kitchen. And yet, she did. Daniel leaned back in his chair. A feeling he couldn't quite name washed over him. Not anger, not betrayal, but awe at a truth that had been hidden for too long. He understood why she had chosen silence, but understanding didn't mean he was ready to accept it. At home, Evelyn was cleaning the kitchen. Leo sat at the table, working through his math homework. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. This silence was different from the others, not tense, but clear. "Mom," Leo said without looking up. "Today you didn't hide." Evelyn stopped what she was doing. She didn't turn around right away. "I didn't hide." Leo nodded. "I saw." The words were simple, but they landed like confirmation. Evelyn turned and looked at her son. There was no familiar avoidance in her eyes now, only real fatigue and something lighter beneath it. "Were you scared?" she asked. Leo thought for a moment, then shook his head. "I was only scared you'd disappear. But today you stood there." Evelyn walked over and rested a hand on his shoulder. "I won't disappear." Leo looked at her for a long time, then went back to his homework as if that promise was enough. Night fell. Evelyn lay in bed, the ceiling dim above her. Her phone rested on the nightstand. No messages. She wasn't waiting, but she couldn't sleep. Across the city, Daniel stood on the balcony of his apartment, cold air slipping through his collar. He held his phone, opened it, closed it, then opened it again. Finally, he called. Evelyn answered on the second ring. "Daniel." His voice was lower than usual. I looked into it. Evelyn wasn't surprised. She simply said, "I know." A silence stretched between them. No accusations, no apologies. Then Daniel spoke again. "You let me walk into a room without knowing where I was standing." Evelyn exhaled. "I didn't mean to, but I didn't know how else to exist." Daniel closed his eyes for a brief moment. "I'm not sure I'm ready for all of it." Evelyn nodded, though he couldn't see her. "I understand." Then Daniel added, his voice slow and deliberate. "But I don't want to turn away. It wasn't a promise, but it left a door open." The next day, Evelyn's phone began to ring. An unfamiliar number. Then another. Emails followed. Invitations, questions, proposals. She didn't answer right away. She watched Leo tying his shoes for school. He looked back at her and smiled. That look was enough for her to understand that every decision from now on would be seen. Evelyn closed her laptop, not to hide, but to choose how she would step forward. This chapter didn't end with a victory. It ended with a shift. One person no longer hiding, another learning how to stand beside the truth, and a child who for the first time wasn't protecting his mother from the world, but trusting that she was strong enough to face it. The silence after a door opens is always the hardest part. Evelyn felt it clearly as she stepped into the office that morning. This was no longer a quiet kitchen or a neighborhood where people exchanged polite smiles. This was a space of decisions, of consequences, of looks that made no effort to hide themselves. Daniel was already there. He stood by the window, his back turned, the city stretching below like a familiar map of power. When he heard her footsteps, he didn't turn right away, as if he needed a few seconds to prepare for this moment. Evelyn stopped a few steps behind him. She didn't move closer. She didn't retreat. "I came because of the invitation," she said, "and because I don't want to keep having this conversation over the phone." Daniel turned. His eyes no longer carried suspicion, only the seriousness of someone who had accepted that the truth could no longer be avoided. I need to know everything, Evelyn. Not to control it, but to understand. Evelyn nodded. All right. She didn't sit. She stood straight the way she once stood before boards of directors, when every decision could either fracture or build an empire. I used to be the final decision maker, she began. Not because I wanted power, but because the system needed a point of accountability. I built structures people only noticed when they collapsed. Daniel listened without interrupting. When it was over, Evelyn continued, I didn't lose money. I lost trust in people, in the way they approached me, not for who I was, but for what I represented. Daniel tightened his jaw. He was beginning to understand. Leo is the reason I left, Evelyn said. Not out of fear, but because I didn't want my son growing up in a world where every handshake came with conditions. Daniel asked quietly, and where do I fit into that? The question hung between them. No jealousy, no accusation, just a boundary. Evelyn met his gaze. You were never part of the plan. I didn't use you as a place to hide. I hid because I wasn't ready to let anyone see all of me. Daniel stepped closer, not invading, just close enough that distance was no longer a wall. Then why now? Evelyn exhaled. Because I can't teach my son to be brave while choosing to stay hidden myself. Daniel was silent for a long time. Then he said, you know, the part that hurt the most wasn't who you used to be. Evelyn waited. It was that you decided I wasn't strong enough to know the truth. The words weren't loud, but they were heavy. Evelyn nodded. I was wrong about that. No justification, no softening. Daniel looked at her, this time without defense. I don't need you to make yourself smaller to stand beside me, but I don't want to be kept outside your life either. Evelyn felt it. A boundary and an invitation. Then she said slowly, I won't hide anymore, but I also won't ask permission to be myself. Daniel smiled faintly. Fair. At home, Leo sat on the couch, his legs swinging slightly. He glanced at the clock, then toward the door. He wasn't worried, but he was waiting. When Evelyn returned, Leo ran to her. Are you okay? Evelyn hugged him. I'm okay, but things are about to change. Leo looked up. Evelyn thought for a moment, then said, I won't hide who I am anymore. And some people may not like that. Leo shrugged. I don't need everyone to like you. I just need you to be real. Evelyn smiled. This time she wasn't holding her breath. The next day, the decision was announced. No press conference, no lengthy statement, just an internal notice. Evelyn Carter was appointed as an independent strategic advisor for the restructuring project. The reaction came faster than she expected. Supporters, critics, others who stayed silent, still recalibrating their perception. Natalie appeared in a group email, her tone polite and cold. Congratulations. I didn't realize you preferred working with secrets. Daniel replied simply, I work with competence. Evelyn read the exchange. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. That evening, she stood in front of the mirror, not to adjust anything, just to look. The woman staring back was no longer divided between two versions. Not a CEO, not an anonymous neighbor, just someone who had chosen to stand upright. This chapter didn't end with a public victory. It ended with a difficult alignment. Two adults learning to see each other without armor. And a child who no longer needed to remind his mother who she used to be, because she had remembered. The evening was quieter than all the nights before it. No parties, no stage lights, no speeches, just the familiar house, the lingering scent of dinner in the air, and the presence of people who had crossed the hardest boundaries together. Evelyn stood by the window, looking out at the neighborhood as it slowly settled into silence. She no longer felt the need to check where she stood in other people's eyes. For the first time in a long while, her place didn't need to be validated. Daniel arrived later than usual. When the door opened, Leo ran out before Evelyn could move. Daniel's here. Daniel bent down and ruffled the boy's hair. Hi, Leo. Did you have a good day at school? Leo nodded. My mom did too. The comment made Daniel look up. Evelyn smiled. No avoidance, no explanation. Dinner was simple. 3 people around the table. No one talked about work. No one mentioned the past. But everything was present in the way they looked at each other, in the silences that were no longer uncomfortable. After the meal, Leo asked to go to his room. Before leaving, he turned back. Mom? Daniel? Don't talk too late. Daniel laughed softly, I promise. When the bedroom door closed, quiet filled the space. Daniel stood and moved closer to Evelyn. He didn't speak right away. He looked at her, as if confirming something important. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, "about whether we're walking the same path or just moving alongside each other." Evelyn listened. "I don't need someone perfect," Daniel continued. "I need someone who stands upright, someone who doesn't shrink herself to be with me, and who doesn't push me away when things get complicated." Evelyn exhaled slowly. "I can't promise it will be easy." Daniel nodded. "I don't need easy. I need real." He took a small box from his jacket pocket. No drama, no kneeling. He simply opened it and placed it in her hand. It wasn't a rehearsed proposal. It was a choice. Evelyn looked at the ring, then at Daniel. In that moment, she didn't see the past. She didn't see what had been lost. She only saw the road ahead, one she no longer had to walk alone. She nodded. "I'm staying, not because I need to, but because I choose to." Daniel closed his hand around hers, gentle, steady, the way they had learned to trust each other. In the next room, Leo lay facing the wall. He wasn't asleep. He heard the low voices, then the silence. He smiled quietly. He didn't need details. He only needed to know his mother wasn't hiding anymore. The weeks that followed passed without noise. Evelyn began to appear publicly again, but without display. She spoke when needed, stayed silent when enough had been said. People slowly adjusted their perceptions. Not everyone accepted it, but that was no longer something to be fixed. Daniel and Evelyn learned how to work together without losing themselves. There were disagreements, there were quiet nights, but there were no more disguises. Leo became the natural center of their new home. No one tried to replace anyone. No one needed to prove anything. Everything was built on consistency. One afternoon, as the three of them sat on the front steps, Leo suddenly asked, "Do you regret it, Mom?" Evelyn looked at him. "Regret what?" "Hiding before." Evelyn thought for a long time. Then she said, "I don't regret protecting you, but I do regret thinking I had to disappear to do that." Leo nodded. "Now you don't disappear anymore." "No." Daniel watched them. In that moment, he understood that real strength doesn't come from taking up space, but from staying when things become real. This story doesn't end with a victory over someone else. It ends with a return to oneself, a return to truth, a return to relationships that no longer require hiding. If you've made it this far, tell me how this story made you feel. Which moment made you pause the longest? How would you rate this story on a scale from 1 to 10? And if you'd like to read more stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapters. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. If this journey touched your heart, surprised you, or made you see strength, identity, and courage in a new way, don't let that feeling stop here. Please take a moment to like this video. It truly helps the channel reach more people who love deep emotional stories like this one. We would also love to hear from you. Comment below and tell us what moment moved you the most. Was it the hidden strength of the mother, the courage of the child, or the moment the truth finally came to light? Your thoughts and perspectives mean more to us than you know. If you enjoy powerful storytelling about resilience, hidden identities, second chances, and life-changing choices, make sure to subscribe to Untold Journey Stories and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss a new story crafted to make you feel, think, and reflect. Every story here is created with care, emotion, and meaning, and your support allows us to keep bringing these journeys to life. Thank you for being part of this community. Until the next story, remember, sometimes the quietest lives hold the most extraordinary truths.